we thought it was proper to check in on the Mets. We've been talking about the Yankees yesterday, and I want to get the feel on the Mets, and who better to do that with than Anthony DiComo, who's a Met beat writer for MLB.com. He does a great job on that site, and he's nice enough to join us now. Anthony, how you doing?
Doing well, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great. The injuries to the Met pitchers, Montas and Manaea, how concerning is that to the team, and where do they go from there? Do they still want to go with a six-man rotation? And who would those six men be if those two guys are out at the first month of the season?
Yeah, I'll answer the second part first. The Mets are done with the six-man idea, at least for now. And the whole point of that was they want to keep Kodai Senga on an extra day of rest, basically every turn through the rotation when they can. But even before the Manaea and Montas injuries, the Mets were kind of questioning that only because they have 3 off days, and I believe the first 16 or 17 days of the season. So if you go with six-man right out of the chute, all of a sudden guys are going long stretches, week plus, without pitching, and they didn't really want that. So now with the injuries, the six-man is definitely out, and I'm not going to say permanently, because if you get to a place later in the season when guys are healthy, then yeah, the Mets do still like the idea of it. But as far as what the injuries do to the rotation and to the depth, it is concerning in the respect that if you looked at this Mets roster heading into spring training, obviously you've got Juan Soto in, you've had another big offseason, all these good things were happening. But the weakness that I think a lot of people looked at was the starting rotation, because there's just not a lot of ceiling there. There's not a lot of guys in that rotation, really anyone in that rotation that you could look at and say, you know what, that's a sure thing. I know this guy's going to give me 150-plus good innings this year. It was just really hard to do that, and now you're down 2 of your better guys, 2 of your guys who you were planning on being in that rotation from the jump. The good news is that what the Mets did do with their rotation this winter is they built it based on depth. They built it and tried to engineer it in such a way that if 1 or 2 guys went down, they could plug another 1 or 2 guys in and not miss a whole lot. So that's what they're banking on right now. Yes, Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas on paper are better than, say, Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning. But the Mets feel comfortable with Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning and Tyler McGill taking some of those innings, at least for the first month or 2 until they can get healthy. And then they'll see. Right now, they're not interested in Jose Quintana. They're not interested in going out and adding more. I think what they will be interested in is if they're still having these rotation issues around midseason, maybe then springing for a bigger deal for like a Dylan Cease type, and you're adding ceiling as well as fortifying that rotation at that point.
The Blackburn thing is interesting, obviously, because he had that surgery and he pitched yesterday. I think it was 8 pitches, something like that. Do you think that he could be ready to start at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, I think he will be. It was 7 pitches yesterday, which was good and bad. You obviously want to see a little more work, and he threw a little in the bullpen, but the sinker was working for him, and that's the kind of pitcher he can be when he's on, is kind of getting weak contact, getting ground balls. But he'll be ready. He's ostensibly healthy. He should be there, and I would suspect he'll have a job in the opening day rotation with the injuries. But the Mets have some decisions. Really, you've got Kodai Senga, you've got David Peterson, and you've got Clay Holmes, who are your 3 starters who you can be certain are going to be there. Then you've got the next 3, which are Blackburn, Canning, and Tyler McGill. Blackburn and Canning are out of options, so you got to think they're going to be on the roster in some form or fashion. But McGill's the guy who keeps teasing this Mets coaching staff. He's got better stuff than the other 2 guys. He's flashed a lot of good upside in the past, especially down the stretch last year. He was great as the Mets were going towards a playoff run. He's never been able to put it together consistently over his career. So it's going to be an interesting decision to see if the Mets want to go with some more quote-unquote sure things with lower ceilings, and that's Blackburn and Canning, or a little bit of an upside play with McGill.
Anthony DiComo covers the Mets for MLB.com. Anthony, I think everything with the Met rotation plays off of Maeda. How is he Senga? I'm sorry, why Maeda? Senga has to be healthy. What's the outlook on him right now? How does he look, and do they think that he's going to be every 5-day starter, every 6-day starter if they go with 6 men? How does he look so far early?
Right now, he looks great. He's throwing in the mid-90s. He looks like Kodai Senga, and look, the thing with Senga is he's had this flash in his rookie year where he certainly looked like an ace at times. He has had control issues, during his time here. But he has had more than anything these health issues that have prevented him from pitching. So right now he's healthy, but we've also heard this story before, and I think no one's going to be counting on him to be that guy until he actually goes out and does it. But you're absolutely right, Michael. Like, this is the linchpin to everything, because he's the one guy you can point to, even more than Sean Manaea, who is essentially the Mets ace last year. Kodai Senga is the one guy you can point to and say, if everything goes right for this dude, he can be a legitimate ace. He can be the type of guy that you would start game one in a playoff series and feel good about. Now, we haven't seen it mostly because of the health, but he has the talent. He can throw in the upper 90s. He's got that ghost fork that if he gets ahead in the count, it's just a devastating pitch. I mean, it's quite literally unhittable if he can get ahead in the count and throw that pitch. So he's the guy. Yeah, it all kind of revolves around him. And I think talking earlier about the rotation and what the Mets could potentially do mid-season, a lot of the reason why the Mets didn't go after the Max Frieds and Blake Snells of the world this offseason was because I think there was a chance, they think from within, maybe it's Senga, maybe it's Manaea, maybe Clay Holmes develops into this type of guy. But if they can kind of create that number one from what they already have, then they don't need to go out and spend all their prospects on a Dylan Cease. But if they can't, then they can do it at that time. So I agree. Senga's the linchpin to everything.
All right, so I come to you because I just don't know the answer. And we had people calling up yesterday, and all I could do was surmise. Iglesias was so important to what the Mets did last year, both in the room and he hit 337 as well. Why the lack of interest completely, especially after Madrigal went down? Why don't they want any part of him?
Yeah, I thought after Madrigal went down that there would be some interest at least, because there really didn't seem like there was much of any before. And quite honestly, I'm flabbergasted that none of the other 29 teams have gone after this guy.
Is this something that we don't know? I mean, you dealt with him all the time. Is he a good guy?
He is a good guy, and he was a good clubhouse guy. I think it's as simple as two things. One is, I don't think this front office believed that what he did last year was real, that he can repeat it, especially at an advanced age. A lot of it was batting average based. A lot of it was, he was batting 400 for a lot of his early time here, and I just don't think the Mets front office thinks that is repeatable. And the other part of it is, if they don't think it's repeatable, then they don't want him here taking up a guaranteed roster spot when they have two young players in Luis Angel Acuna and Brett Baty, who they want to give time to. Maybe not on opening day, but in that first third of the season, there's a real thought that Acuna and Baty can be there and can be helpful pieces. But if Iglesias is around, they're not going to be able to have space for him. So whether you agree with it or not, I mean, obviously Iglesias was a huge part of not only what the Mets did last year, but who they were. Their whole identity was kind of tied up in that OMG mentality. So you do lose a little bit of that without him. But one thing about David Stearns that I have learned since covering him the past couple of years is that he's very convicted in what he believes in. And if he thinks that, say, not pursuing Jose Iglesias because you want to give chances for young players, or not pursuing Jose Quintana because you're comfortable with the depth that you have in-house, he's not going to panic. He's not going to change his tune just based on an injury or two. He's going to stick with it, and I think we've seen that over the past month with how Stearns has operated here.
Now, I've heard, Anthony, that underneath the numbers, the deep dive underneath the numbers, analytic teams don't like him at all, Iglesias. Is that what you're hearing as well? Because I guess that's what the Mets are saying. They don't think it's sustainable, so the 337 wasn't real. And analytic people don't go nuts over batting average anyway. Could it be that, when you go under the hood, there's not much there?
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. It's a very batting average-based profile. Me personally, I like batting average. I like guys who can hit 300, and Iglesias has done that for a lot of his career. But this isn't also just the Mets thing. If you look back 2 years ago, Iglesias got DFA'd, was released around the middle of the season, I believe by the Padres, and sat out the rest of the year because he couldn't find a major league job anywhere. And again, this is even before the OMG stuff. This is the guy who's been around a long time, a well-respected veteran, someone who's hit 300 plus at the highest level and done it. It's just not a skill set that's valued in a front office these days. And I think you're probably looking at a situation here where teams say, okay, we'll take a shot on you in a minor league deal. And Iglesias was saying, well, minor league deal, well, hang on a second. Like, look at what I've done. Look at what I've accomplished. I deserve a guaranteed spot somewhere. like I said, I understand in a vacuum why the Mets aren't doing it. The fact that 30 teams across baseball are saying we don't want this guy, to me, is a little perplexing.
Now, the thing that I would have a problem with, I understand Madrigal is a veteran guy who could play all over, but if they decide that the backup infielder at some point is going to be Acuna, isn't that counterproductive? This is a guy that people think could actually be a starter, and you're taking away some of his progress by not playing him every day. You've got a shortstop that plays every single day, so he's not going to see that much action if he's sitting on the bench. Is that the right way to use that prospect?
Yeah, and as I said earlier, I think there's a pretty solid chance that Acuna will end up at AAA to start the year. Not just because of the playing every day thing, but I think it's easy to get fooled into thinking he's a finished product because he came up in September last year and was really incredible right away and did some really nice things for the Mets down the stretch. And basically, they didn't lose anything, missing Francisco Lindor for the final couple weeks of the season there. But if you look at the bigger picture of Acuna, he struggled a bit at AAA last year. He was very inconsistent. He went through a couple of deep slumps there over the course of the summer, and I think Mets officials are looking at that bigger picture of the whole summer versus a 2.5 week stretch at the end of the year. I don't think they think Acuna is a finished product. So, yes, to answer your question, I do think he's going to go to AAA. But remember last year, Mark Vientos started out at AAA. And by the end of May, he was up and up for good. I think that's what the Mets are looking at with Acuna, that if he goes down to Syracuse, has a good month, has a good 6 weeks, he can come up and at that point be essentially a finished product. Brett Baty is the other one who's in a little bit of a different camp because he's had so much minor league time over these years now that I'm not sure you need to have him playing every day. The Mets are more concerned about what he can do defensively. Can he play second base in addition to third? Can he maybe even play a little bit of shortstop? Because if he can, and he has a strong spring, which he's already started doing with a homer, a bunch of hits already, he's the guy I could see more than Acuna being there at the end of the bench on opening day.
We're talking with Anthony DiComo. He covers the Mets as their beat writer on MLB.com. People try to, read the tea leaves, connect the dots. So the Mets have some starting pitching injuries. The Yankees reportedly are trying to trade Marcus Strowman. I've seen a lot of stories out there that the Mets could be interested in Strowman. I don't see the fit. Is there any interest at all?
Yeah, I've seen some of the fantasy baseball trade ideas people are throwing around. Starling Marte for Marcus Strowman. The Mets would love to get rid of Marte's salary. They, it's just a piece that, while it fits in their roster, they don't necessarily need to be paying all that money to Marte for the guy who's essentially a platoon DH and the short side of a platoon at this point in his career. But I don't know if the Strowman thing is a fit. Again, similar to a Jose Quintana, if the Mets are going to make a rotation play at this point, I think they're looking more at, okay, down the road, can we find some upside? Can we find a guy who can be a number one, a number two type for us? And Marcus Stroman's just not that guy at this point in his career. He's more of a, we're going to go out there and I'm going to give you some innings, I'm going to get some balls on the ground. And I just don't think it's something the Mets are interested in at this point.
All right, so you've been around the team the whole spring training. You know what they have. You see what they have. Obviously, the addition of Soto is unbelievably important. But do you think they're better than the Phillies and the Braves?
I think they have to prove it. I think they have the talent to be better. I think they have the talent certainly to have the best lineup in the NL East. The rotation piece is troubling for me. The Braves, I think, run pretty decently, even losing Max Fried. I like a lot of the pitchers. They've managed to develop some interesting guys, Schwellenbach chief among them, that gives you, some indication that they could be pretty good. The projection systems love the Braves right now. Interestingly, the projection systems hate the Phillies, who I think has the second best rotation in baseball after the Dodgers. They're older guys, which I think plays into some of the skepticism on the computers. But the Phillies have been there. They've done that. Yes, the Mets beat them in a playoff series last year, but the Phillies were the better team for a big chunk of the season. So they're really tightly bunched together, and I don't want to sound like it's a cop-out answer. I think the Mets definitely have the talent to win the NL East. They need to prove it in my eyes. And by prove it, I mean they need to show me that they have enough starting pitching to get through 162 and beat the good teams when it matters. How's
it been dealing with Soto last year? For the 1 year he was at the Yankees, he was very easy to get along with, easy to talk to. Have you found that in a Met uniform?
Yeah, so far so good. He's I think maybe that year in New York is a good primer for him of what to expect in the market because, frankly, while the Mets might not be quite the Yankees in terms of media attention, there's a lot of attention around this team right now. There's a lot of people who, look at the Mets and think that they could be on the cusp of maybe taking some interest away from the Yankees in New York. And look, we've had this conversation before many times when the Mets get good of is it a Yankee town, is it a Met town, and people love to argue over it. But with Steve Cohen's money now and what he's pumping into the team on an annual basis, and especially with the run that the Mets went on last year, and it sure seems like Cohen is not going to give up here until he wins a title or maybe 2 or 3. This is a real runway for the Mets to do something special, to make some new fans that might have been more interested in going to the Bronx in the past. So we'll see. But as for Soto, he's a big piece of that rivalry now, going from the Yankees to the Mets. And I don't think you're going to find too many people who don't expect him to have a huge year.
I'll tell you what, get ready for that series in May because he's going to hear boos like he's never heard before when the Mets come to Yankee Stadium. I just know it because the fans feel like they were left at the altar. And I kept telling everybody all year, it's going to come down to who makes him the best offer. That's all there is to it. You can love him all you want. If he wants to go somewhere else, there's no attraction like there was with Judge. It was just a one-year stop.
Right, and it's not like this guy grew up in pinstripes, right? He
Nope.
was not someone who came through the Yankee system. He wasn't a Yankee fan as a kid. He wasn't any of that stuff. So I think he saw, opportunity here. I would have said yes to $765 million as well. But I think what would be truly galling to me if I were a Yankee fan were some of the comments that he feels like he has a better chance to win here long-term than he did in the Bronx, because that's something that forever, for my entire lifetime and years as well, Michael, you could hang your hat on the Yankees having the best chance of anyone in the league to win a World Series and, to win over the next decade or for the next 2 decades. But right now, Juan Soto is saying out loud that he thinks it's the Mets. It's an interesting time for this rivalry. I would love to see the rivalry kind of become renewed in that way that we probably haven't really seen here since, I guess, 99, 2000.
Well, the thing that I pushed back on what he said, Anthony, and we're talking with Anthony DiComo of MLB.com, was you look at the runway the Mets have to get to the World Series, and then you look at the runway the Yankees have to get to the World Series. Yankees is much easier. The American League is not that great anymore, and the National League is loaded. So to say that the Mets have a better chance, I don't know how he looks at it. If he wants to say the Mets have a better team, you could argue that point, but you can't say they have a better chance to get to the World Series when the Yankees do, because they have fewer potholes to get through.
Yeah, look, the Dodgers are the big one. As long as the Dodgers are around, that's always going to be an issue. But if you do look at the divisions themselves, the AL East and the NL East, the Red Sox are making some noise right now. The Orioles still have youth on their side, at least for now. I'm not so sure about the other 2 teams, the Blue Jays and the Rays, what they're up to. But in the NL East, yes, you have this power trio of the Mets, the Braves, and the Phillies. The Phillies are starting to age out a little bit. I still think they're going to be very good this year. They may well win the division, but that rotation is old. That lineup is old, and it's probably not going to be too long here before they start to decline a bit. The Braves, we'll see. They've still got all of these players under contract, these position players, the Acunas and the Albies of the world, guys who are going to be here forever, Matt Olson. But they're not so young anymore either. So I do think there's a runway here for the Mets to kind of rise up and be the team that takes the NL East. And again, maybe not this year, but maybe next year. And maybe for the back half of the 2020s, the Mets are kind of in contention for that division title every year, whereas the Braves and the Phillies suddenly are not. And in the AL, maybe the Yankees have a little bit of a fight on their hands as well. So we'll see. It's so hard to project these things, Michael, year over year. You don't know how teams are going to operate. You don't know how guys are going to develop. But I do know this. If Steve Cohen is going to be the number 1 or at least 1A to the Dodgers in terms of pumping money into his payroll every single year, it's hard to be bad when you're running up $300 million payrolls every year. It's just hard to be bad. And I think that's probably what Juan Soto was looking at when he said that, was that this team is willing to spend money, and as long as they're willing to do that, they're going to be pretty good.
Did you get the exclusive today, Anthony, with Seinfeld? I heard he's at Clover Park, so I expect a big exclusive on that.
Yeah, he's an intimidating guy to talk to because I've met him a couple times before, and I always find myself wanting to make jokes in front of him, and I'm like, what am I doing? He probably thinks I'm an idiot. But I think he's maybe a little funnier than I am.
It's funny though. If you try to make jokes to a comedian, it kind of it's a no-win because they're going to be very, very judgmental on the joke. So I don't think that's the route to take, Ant.
Exactly. It's like when people come up to me and try to tell me what the Mets are doing right and wrong. It's like I'm around them every day. I might have a little better perspective. I think Jerry Seinfeld's got a better perspective on comedy than I do.
Absolutely, Anthony. You're welcome on the show anytime. Thank you for giving us a couple of minutes.
Appreciate it, Michael. Take care.
Anthony DiComo of MLB.com. He covers the Mets, so the lay of the land there. It's going to be interesting what their rotation is at the start. There's not going to be a Manaea, and there's not going to be a Montas for at least 2 months. Manaea's saying it's going to be early in April. I'm somewhat dubious. Obliques take a long time, and if you think about a pitching motion, how difficult it is for that oblique to heal, they're going to have to take their time with him as well. So the top of that rotation, there's a lot of emphasis now on Clay Holmes, who's looked great, by the way. I think he's had 6 scoreless innings. He's been almost unhittable. But he was there early, and pitchers are always ahead of hitters early. But I don't want to take anything away because I'm a Clay Holmes fan. Yeah, I know he lost his closing role with the Yankees, but if you listen to the show over the last couple of years, I defended Clay Holmes all the time. Yankee fans wanted him out. He was terrible. The guy has filthy stuff, and now he's added a changeup, which makes him even more difficult to hit. I think it's going to be a smart pickup by David Stearns and the Mets. See if he lasts 3 years, and let's see if he can give them 6 innings and 30 starts. If he can, at $13 million a year, that is an absolute bargain they got.